firstly, let me offer a very warm welcome to everyone that's joined this session. I'm hearing it's a truly global affair, even if it is less than 10 people participating right now. So thank you very much for taking some time to join this last session. My name's Malik. I'm the head of business development at Equiem, the global leader in tenant experience. And I'll come on to talk a little bit later about kind of who we are and what we do later in the presentation. But really the next 15 minutes or so is going to be focused pretty much trying to answer this question at the top here. What are occupiers looking for in today's market? I think we'd all agree that this is a hugely important question to try and tackle. And whether we're a landlord and we're struggling to retain occupier interest, or perhaps we're agents appointed to actually generate that occupier interest, or quite frankly, whether we're...
Adam, sorry for intervening, but could you share your slides with us maybe?
Oh, I'm so sorry. Hi.
No problem at all. Please continue.
Thank you for mentioning.
Of course.
Or whether we're actually occupiers ourselves and want to know what's reasonable to expect of our workplace. It's a really vital question. But I think to answer this question at the top, I think we also need to think about these other additional questions as well. You know, why are occupiers looking for those things, and how can landlords actually meet these needs? So the what, the why, and the how is really what I'm going to be focusing on for the next 15 minutes or so, and hopefully we'll have some time for Q&A at the end. So in terms of what occupiers actually want, I think to actually answer that question is really vital for us, first of all, just to briefly explore one of the major socio-demographic shifts that's happening in the modern occupier market. And, you know, this is no doubt the growing impact of on the workplace of millennials. I'm sure you're very kind of tired about hearing about millennials. I'm very tired myself of speaking about them, but there's no doubt we can't question their importance in the workplace today. And a lot of the research coming out.
Adam, I'm sorry. This is Derek from Global PropTech, but we still can't see your screen.
I don't know what's happened here. Okay, give me a second.
Okay.
Let's try that again. Okay.
There we go.
There we go. Okay. Should I rewind or should I carry on?
If it's up to you. If you want to start over, if there is something you wanted the audience to see.
Okay, I'll tell you what, I'll rewind to this slide here. Can everybody see that? Yeah?
Yes, we can see that.
Okay, cool. So the key question that I want to try and answer over the course of this presentation is, you know, what are occupiers looking for in today's market? And I think we'd all agree that this is a hugely important question to try and tackle. And whether we're a landlord and we're struggling to perhaps retain occupier interest, or whether we're agents appointed to actually generate that interest, or quite frankly, whether we're occupiers ourselves and we just want to know what's reasonable to expect from our workplace. It's a really vital question. And I think to help us answer it, we also got to consider these additional questions too. You know, why are we looking for those things, and how can landlords actually meet those demands? So the why and the how is really what I'm going to focus on for the next 15 minutes. Hopefully you can now see me changing my slides. So in terms of what occupiers actually want, I think to help us answer this question, we also need to recognize one of the major socio-demographic shifts in the modern occupier market. And that's really around millennials. And, you know, a lot of the research coming out is suggesting that by next year, millennials will comprise roughly 50% of the workplace. And this demographic change in our workplace is going to have a huge impact on business, and the success of companies for years to come, I think, will rest on the shoulders of millennials. And certainly Cushman & Wakefield feel that way too, because they've summed it up really nicely here when they've said that addressing millennials' working preferences will be key to businesses' prosperity. So you might be thinking, why? You know, what does that all mean? Well, let me help to try and spell it out. I think unemployment has actually been declining in a lot of Western economies. But one thing that's for sure is that corporations are all increasingly targeting this same kind of STEM talent pool. But the reality is that a lot of education systems simply cannot deliver fast enough in a lot of Western economies. And I think in the face of such undersupply of this kind of STEM talent, real estate executives interestingly ranked this being the #1 challenge within their organizations. And again, Cushman & Wakefield concluded that the #1 challenge facing companies right across the globe was talent availability. And so to put that simply, if you're a mid or large size organization, you are likely engaged in this highly competitive, ongoing war to attract the best talent. And not only that, given that a lot of millennials will tend to switch jobs every couple of years, you're also engaged in this war to try and retain that talent too. And so like never before, I think a key weapon in that war to attract and retain talent is now going to be the workplace, because millennials will place big expectations on what they expect from their working environment. Here at Equiem, we actually conducted an occupier survey of our own across our portfolio of UK assets that our technology has been rolled out into. And we had well over 1,000 respondents to that survey. 95% of them overwhelmingly said that the workplace environment was a really important factor when choosing where to work. And so if we think about the kind of the bar for workplace expectations, it is continuing to rise. And what started out as expectations and workplace perks in the larger kind of tech giants of Googles and Airbnbs of the world is now starting to trickle down into smaller organizations as well. And interestingly, this report from Building Engines kind of reinforces that message when they say that the changing workplace means that tenants will continue to raise the bar, holding buildings to higher expectations, and the space they occupy has become an integral means of attracting and retaining talent. So the workplace is no doubt a very vital tool to help recruit the best possible staff. Again, from Cushman & Wakefield, they've equally kind of made a very important put out a very important message here too, which is attracting and retaining talent is now a key driver of how companies think about where they locate their operations. And I think what they're really talking about here is that the workplace is not just helping companies in their recruitment process, but occupiers will actually start to look at buildings that can help them attract that same talent. We often hear this kind of phrase being mentioned a lot of, particularly a lot of real estate events, this whole kind of war for talent. I've obviously mentioned it myself a couple of times. And we here at Equiem think that this kind of war for talent is becoming landlords' war for tenant. And so if we go back to our original question, what is it that occupiers want? Well, what we've seen so far is that the growing impact of millennials as a talent pool means that occupiers want to attract that talent by really providing a satisfying and engaging working environment for them. And so what we think is that landlords, if they don't appeal to the end user of space, they won't appeal to the corporate as a whole. And so this enormous shift, if we go back to kind of the responsibility for employee comfort. Traditionally that had sat with the employers themselves. But the reality is that this is starting to squarely sit on the shoulders of landlords as well. And I think historically, if we think about how occupiers have perhaps shopped for office space, they've thought about it in very traditional terms, location or natural light, or whether there's a marble lobby, or whether there's, car parking available. But the reality is that this war for talent equals war for tenant trend that we've been talking about means that the kind of the responsibility for that employee comfort and enjoyment and satisfaction has shifted. And expectations from the end user have really increased. So the question now becomes not what do occupiers want, but what is it that modern workers want? And what is it that millennials want? And if you're leasing a building, that is the question I think that you really need to be answering and looking for solutions to. And so if we think about what they want when they come to work, I think PwC has made a really interesting and helpful summary here, because I think it debunks a lot of myths in terms of what the modern occupier is thinking about or modern worker is thinking about when they go to work at a particular company. And they say here that choice, flexibility and experiences at work are more important to millennials than other factors, including salary. And so what they mean is that the decision-making process is no longer being driven by salary. It's actually being driven by what their likely experience at work is going to be. So I want to just pick out a kind of few other key trends. I think the first up is really around variety and choice. The currency of the latest generations is about experiences. They don't necessarily want to hoard things and keep them. They want to exchange and change them. And this has implications for the types of things that, the workplaces are also providing to occupiers, especially when it comes to things like F&B. If workers can, essentially order their dinner when they get home from any restaurant within a 5-mile radius via Deliveroo, they really want something of a choice when it comes to F&B at work too. And our research has certainly validated this position that food trucks and food markets and special weekly offers at particular restaurants all prove to be hugely popular with workers. And secondly, it's around flexibility and convenience. When we're talking about that here, it's not really thinking about it as kind of corporate flexibility or varying lease lengths and terms, but flexibility and convenience for the end user. And given the rise in popularity of kind of flexible working, I think this is a huge thing for workers. The days of parking yourself in one seat from 9 till 5, I think I know more, and people want to be able to move seamlessly around space and mix up where they work and when they work, whether it's heading down to a couch in the lobby or holding a team meeting in a communal breakout space or perhaps booking a boardroom. People want that flexibility, and they also want that convenience. So they want to be able to pick up their Amazon delivery from a locker, or order their lunch to their desk, or book facilities at the touch of a button. The third one here is really around events and experiences. And given that the lines between work and home life continue to blur, modern workers don't just want to blur them at one end. And what I mean by that is, if workers are expected to work when at home, they also want to be able to then kind of enjoy something of home when they're at work. And so, that means that events and experiences which provide the opportunity to kind of exercise or to learn or to relax are all hugely important. Whether it's kind of, taking part in on-site yoga, or it's kind of attending a lunch and learn session, or enjoying, a community book club, those opportunities to attend those events and experiences is highly sought after. And finally, it's the opportunity to meet people from outside your own company. And I think a common misconception is that we want to be surrounded by people all the time at work. And, with a number of traditional players believing that this is, driving the serviced office phenomenon, I think that a lot of the reports indicate that people still like to work in quiet spaces, and not quite often by themselves. I know, in particular, I do. And so that means they want access to things like community drinks or charity events and classes and networking events, something that brings them kind of together with other like-minded people. And I think this was summarized, really well by Juliet Morgan of British Land, when she said that the future of offices will be in hospitality. And I think a consumer-focused, consumer-first environment that kind of meets the needs of every individual within the building will ultimately end up meeting the needs of corporate occupiers as well. I think the other issue here is that a minority of workplaces are really equipped to provide this type of service and really satisfy their end users. In fact, there's probably only one genuinely kind of consumer brand in commercial real estate space, and that's arguably WeWork. But now that the industry has really fundamentally shifted, and this is an industry which is really now at the beginning of a transformation, I think a lot of workplaces today are simply still not cutting it in terms of what consumers want. And again, according to our own survey, where we interviewed about well over 1,000 people in office space in the UK, 94% of them felt that the average office space simply should place a much greater emphasis on people's enjoyment and comfort. And so, look, I actually don't know who has joined into this session, but if you're here as perhaps an agent, or maybe you work for a property owner, or perhaps you're a property manager, these changes in the industry may have you feeling, pretty worried. It could be because you're concerned about how you now go about attracting and retaining occupiers, or perhaps you're just unsure, how do we create a really compelling experience so that our building becomes a standout proposition? Or you're just worried about, how do we actually bring people together? How do we avoid spending vast sums of money to kind of build that community? And these are real concerns. But if you're anything like me, you will actually recognize these concerns and actually see them as a wonderful opportunity, because the good news is that those landlords who know how to meet these modern occupier expectations will clearly be in extremely high demand from the occupier market. And so we think there's actually kind of three possible responses to this. I think number one, you could just give up and bury your head in the sand, and eventually everyone will calm down. The reality is that every other sector and item is becoming more consumer focused too. So if we think about how we order taxis through Uber, or order food through Deliveroo, or look for a date through Tinder, the real estate sector will no doubt miss out on revenue and business if it doesn't act. And again, picked out this from CBRE, who said that 81% of occupiers perceive amenities as an integral part of the employee experience. Secondly, you could look to seek out a partner with a co-working brand, or indeed create your own. But I think there are some, fundamental challenges with this. And number one, tastes change, and they change very quickly, certainly in the case of millennials. And if landlords believe that millennials can be satisfied for the next 10 years by mirroring successful co-working models, then they'll forever be playing catch up. But it's also still clear that I think the other kind of big challenge with going down this pathway is around the customer data, because you end up ultimately handing that over to the co-working operator. Or the third option is to really turn to technology like ours. We have been in the business of helping landlords and property managers cater to these changing occupier needs for close to 10 years now. I want to take you all back for a second, back to 2011 in the heart of Melbourne. There's a 1 million square foot office building there called Rialto, a real landmark building in the city, but one that had naturally, because of its age, started to become a bit tired. And occupiers were starting to leave. They were starting to go to shinier, newer buildings in close proximity, ones that could offer a much more wider range of amenities and services. So the landlord there, Lorenz Grollo, really had no idea then how to gauge what the remaining occupiers were looking for. And so actually he saw a huge opportunity here to create a technology proposition, ultimately to try and connect to the tenants that were in the building. And that's really how Equiem was born. So we're a technology company which really helps to connect landlords with tenants, and helps tenants to engage and connect with the amenities and services and the offer of the asset in which they're working in. And so whether it's enabling users to order coffee at the desk, or have their dry cleaning picked up, or perhaps they're promoting and hosting on-site yoga classes, whatever it might be to activate the space and to be able to then connect to the space. What actually sits behind the platform is the really interesting piece, which is really our market-leading data analytics software, so that owners can actually start to better understand what people want based on what the data is telling us, rather than kind of continuing of this trend, we should do things based on what we think is a good idea. And so the result of that introduction of Equiem was that not only is Rialto fully let, but now the landlord has access to data on the 90% tenants that actually work in that building, because they're all signed up and they all actively use the platform. And so this success has really allowed us to scale the business and really kind of become a leader in our field, with our technology now being rolled out across some 60 million square foot of real estate across our core regions of Australia, UK and Ireland, and the USA. And the platform's now being used by close to 9,000 individual businesses, comprising well over 145,000 individual users. So however you choose to react to this changing occupier dynamic, we've seen technology have a huge impact on buildings faced with the same challenges, whether it's from landlords like this, M&G Real Estate, or perhaps it's occupiers at office buildings such as the Bank of Melbourne in Rialto, or indeed the impact that it's having on the end user space, so the actual individuals that work in those buildings. So look, whether you choose to embrace technology or you seek out another solution, what's clear is that occupier demands are changing, and they're changing fast. And so landlords and property managers, I think, have to also change too. My advice is always, when you're kind of listening to presentations like this, is what is the big takeaway? And my suggestion to everybody that's listening is, do something. Don't stand still and do nothing. Do something. Thanks very much.